Don Tapscott.
And I'm Alex Tapscott.
And this is What's on Tap. Alex, this week, a lot going on. Let's focus on a big one. A member of the Federal Reserve Board, Governor Randall Quarles, he gave a rather controversial speech where he expressed skepticism about most of the arguments in favor of a central bank digital currency. He said the benefits are unclear, and he talked about all the downsides, that if the public could bypass traditional banks and go straight to the Fed for digital money, that would be a problem. And he said the benefits that consumers get through bank competition might be diminished if the Fed stepped further into this space. Mm-hmm. He also worried about cyber attacks on a system whose security would be difficult to design. So what's going on here? Actually, another Richmond Fed president, Thomas Barkin, also part of the same conference, said, and I'm going to quote him here, "We already have a digital currency in this country. It's called the dollar," Barkin says. So if you're going to enhance the digital currency, you should have to decide for what reason. And so clearly there's a lack of knowledge, at least on the part of Barkin, as to what a digital currency is. But some initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I think that First, it's important to note that there's often not consensus with the Federal Reserve Board about many issues, including whether or not to, raise rates or cut rates or, do other sort of traditional central bank activity. And so it's not uncommon to see a difference of opinion here. Quarles' comments, I thought, were really quite fascinating for a couple of reasons. Number one, his speech showed actually quite a deep knowledge of digital assets.
Yeah.
I think his comments about the viability of a CBDC were actually the least interesting part of that discussion, because we know that there's no consensus on the Federal Reserve Board, and it could take a while. The more interesting part of his comments were about the viability of stablecoins created by private companies. He said we need not fear stablecoins. And he pointed to the fact that banks historically have been the primary creators of the money supply. The way it works when you go to the bank is you get a $500,000 mortgage. The bank is not lending you $500,000 of depositor money. There's usually only $50,000 of depositor money backing that loan. That's called fractional reserve. So in the process of creating that mortgage, the bank has just created $450,000 of money. And then your house price goes up, and then you take out a line of credit against that house, which is based on bank created money, and you go buy a car or you go pay for a vacation. You've added money to the money supply. So that's how money works, right? The Federal Reserve creates money, obviously, but most of money creation is created by banks. So a private company creating a stable coin that's backed by the US dollar, that exists in a regulated environment and is used for payments, is quite similar, actually, to how banking works today. And what Quarles also said was the comments about stablecoins dislodging the US dollar or somehow posing a threat, he said was also very odd, because it's the fact that U.S. banks play such a primary role in the global economy that's helped to maintain the U.S. dollar. And he said a U.S. dollar stablecoin, if it's used widely for moving money between people across border, or is used as a form of settling transactions between businesses, could actually help to solidify and strengthen the U.S. dollar system, right? So it's something that I think is important to know, which is that the Federal Reserve has always acted sort of hand in glove with the banking system in order for the money supply in the economy to function. And this is something that's no different. Now, he made a number of caveats about, well, of course, it's got to be regulated, it's got to be US based, it's got to be US dollar backed, et cetera. Of course, he's going to say that. Not all stable coins are like that. Plenty of proponents of stable coins have suggested a basket of currencies. The government has been far less interested in that, because that could actually pose a threat. So I think that it's going to take some time. We know that there are benefits to a CBDC. Theoretically, but we also know in practice that there are clear benefits to the creation of stablecoins. Anybody who's ever sent a wire, on a Friday afternoon knows that it is a system that is incredibly antiquated.
Well, before we explore that a bit, I mean, what about the case for a CBDC? You have people like Christian Carlo, who I'm sure doesn't think that this speech from the Fed governor is very inspiring, that argue that a central bank digital currency would give central banks greater transparency into the economy. They could have a lighter touch on regulation. They could, if they want to put new money into the money supply, they could have a better handle on what's happening. Are people investing? Are they borrowing? Are they spending? In a crisis, you could helicopter drop money right onto the mobile devices of people. And the big argument from Chris, of course, is that if we don't do this, then China's going to do it, and this is going to threaten the U.S. dollar as the currency of record. So what about these arguments?
Yeah, well, those are all arguments that we know could justify creating a CBDC. And I think that if you look at what a lot of central bank leaders have said recently, they're mostly open-minded about the subject, but they do have all these implementation challenges. And even in announcing a recent study about creating a digital dollar, the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, said that it's important to focus on ensuring a safe and efficient payment system that provides broad benefits to American households and businesses while also embracing innovation. Sort of a bit of a cop-out there. But I think the key thing here is that there's all these design challenges for building CBDCs. Coral sort of mentioned them. The question of, are we going to make it anonymous? How do you maintain privacy? Are these transactions immutable? Are they decentralized, or does the central bank, as the creator of money, have some ability to go in and change the algorithm, right? Bitcoin is 21 million Bitcoins ever. Well, a US dollar system where the central bank can't control the money supply wouldn't work for a central bank. They would need to have that control. So there are a lot of these design challenges that are present alongside all the obvious potential benefits of a central bank digital currency. The comment by the other guy, I forget his name. The other Barkin. Mm-hmm. Barkin's comments sort of, I don't know. I think it's a bit flippant, and I don't think he probably really believes it. I mean, the U.S. dollar is not a digital currency. What proponents like Christian Carlo and others mean when they talk about digital currencies is a native digital asset that the government creates that acts as a digital bearer instrument. So if you have it and someone else doesn't have it, it's not an input in a ledger controlled by a bank or some corporation. It is an actual, it's though intangible, a sort of physical dollar that you own in the digital world. And so those are two very different things. And It's quite clear that they're very different things. And, a stable coin is not the same thing as your bank balance. And I think a stable coin is a digital dollar, right? So if you have a USDC, it's one US dollar coin. You've custody it, you control it yourself. It is real money. It's like having money in your wallet. That's very different from having an input in a bank statement, which is effectively like the sum of the assets and liabilities of that company. Your counterparty risk is the bank in that case. So they are very, very different concepts. And I think that, that's not a helpful sort of perspective that he has. I think that Quarles' take is quite interesting about the value of the private sector. And, lots of proponents of stablecoins have said, of course, we've got to work hand in glove with the banking sector or innovative new firms like Circle that created USDC to actually advance any kind of system. You need in any kind of capitalist system, you need to have the support of the private sector in order to make that kind of implementation a reality.
So Quarles is not worried about the U.S. dollar losing its hegemony.
No,
and he says certainly not. Because of a CBDC. He talks about the importance in global financial markets, and the depth and importance of the treasuries and the dollar overall. But I don't know. Clearly, I mean, what is the threat here to the U.S. dollar if they don't do something? Set aside what the solution is, if they don't move towards some kind of strategy for a digital currency.
Well, the argument would be if the U.S. doesn't do it, someone else will, and if the Chinese and they will, and they are, and if the U.S. chooses a route where they're relying on companies and banks to be innovative rather than the government doing that, that's a very different approach than what's happening in China, where instead of relying on banks to be innovators, the government has engaged, embraced, co-opted a lot of big private companies, big corporations like Alipay, Alibaba, Tencent, and others. Enlisted them, I should say, in this effort would be the right word. They've been enlisted in this effort, and it's being led by the government to export this digital currency and to use that as a political and economic tool. So who knows how that's going to play out? But I do think that it's necessary, it's important that the Federal Reserve maintain an open mind about CBDCs. And I think, honestly, the innovation can happen concurrently. They can be huge backers and supporters of really important initiatives like the USDC from Circle, and they can also continue to innovate internally so that they're prepared when the time comes.
Yeah. Well, at least he didn't come down on Bitcoin. He said, yeah, sure, it's a speculative investment, but it won't be a revolutionary means of payment, and therefore it's highly unlikely to affect the role of the US dollar or require a response with a CBDC. So that's very different than what you hear in other countries. For example, China's come really hard on Bitcoin as a threat to the hegemony of its fiat currency, which we always argued was ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's definitely a threat on the margins in the sense that the government wants to control the banking system. And if people own Bitcoin, they may be able to get money out of the country, and that is undermining their system. But it's not going to replace the yuan, obviously, anytime soon. I think that the opinion on Bitcoin is probably maybe a little blasé, frankly, but I think it also is just a reflection of the sort of the strength that the Federal Reserve Board perceives the US dollar has in the world. And I think it's welcome, honestly, because what's happening in the Bitcoin world and in the crypto asset world more generally are the beginnings of some really important models that could change how we do all sorts of financial services, not just payments, which is what stable coins are useful for, among other things, but lending, investing, the exchanging of assets, all the different functions of the industry. So, it's far from certain how the government overall is going to approach this in the US. It's important, of course, and you mentioned this on previous discussions, that there's a zillion agencies and some of them have political leadership and they change with administrations and sometimes they're at odds with each other. And it's sort of a messy, chaotic system. So you got to try and figure the signal from the noise and not to use a cliche, but.
Well, and one thing that is stable is that the banks don't think this is a great idea to move towards a CBDC. There was a cover story in The Economist a few weeks ago called GovCoin, where the editorial, the subtext was "a world without banks." Now, that may be overstating the case too, but clearly a lot of what banks do today is related to exactly what you were describing, the sort of creation of currency. And
it's so funny, like, people, don't trust banks or whatever, have a negative opinion of them in a lot of parts of the world. But their opinion of other institutions and government isn't always as high either. So I don't know if a system where you disintermediate banks and rely exclusively on the central authority of the central bank, is a system that I think a lot of people would find attractive, quite honestly. Well, it certainly would not fly in the US of A, in my opinion.
Right. So, final thought: stable coins. So, how would that work, and what kind of um, use cases could a stable coin address? And how do you? What are some scenarios and how you see that coming together? I mean, you've got USDC and these stable coins that have just kind of come out of the community, but eventually you could see the big banks getting in behind something like this. Any thoughts?
Well, I think that stablecoins have many use cases already, and they're actually a huge market. And maybe this is something that people don't fully appreciate. CBDCs are a science experiment, other than the initiative in China. The value of privately issued stablecoins has grown from one to over $100 billion in like 3 years. That is, parabolic growth. And right now, they're used primarily as a medium of exchange and a store of value within the crypto asset ecosystem. So you want to buy NFT art, people use stable coins. You want to, buy, you want to participate in DeFi applications, people use stable coins. You want to, et cetera, like those kinds of things. But it's quite obvious that, at least to me and to many others, this is not a unique thought, that the ability to seamlessly move US dollars and other recognized assets peer to peer between parties across vast distances, across geographies, across regulatory regimes in a matter of seconds at very little fee has a lot of use cases, like remittances, for example. 600, probably 700 billion as of this year, dollars of remittances travel between the wealthy world and the developing world. And the average fees are 10%. So that's a $70 billion prize that's up for grabs, right? The usage of stablecoins as a way to settle transactions in trade finance, for example, or as a way to store value, while you're waiting for a ship to be delivered or an invoice to be cleared or what have you. Any myriad of transactions, really, I think involving dollars is a use case where stablecoins are going to eat the current system. So SWIFT, for example, the interbank system for cross-border money transfers, built in the 70s, older than I am, toast, as far as I'm concerned. Like I truly do believe, and there's lots of evidence. Now, there's going to be probably a stablecoin blow up at some point. In the end, the value of these stablecoins are backed by reserves that are held in banks. And so there is obviously counterparty risk to a stablecoin, but I think that's going to be a watershed moment. Not that says, oh, stablecoins are overrated. It's actually going to be, okay, if this is going to be systemically important, we need to regulate them and have a whole, set of rules and requirements. And that's actually going to set the foundation for massive future growth.
Yeah. I think that's it for this week. What's on tap? Just some announcements. The Enterprise Blockchain Awards are open for nominations. A big ceremony will be November 15th. Go to blockchainrevolutionglobal.com and get your application in. Our new book, Platform Revolution, comes out in the first week of October. It's now available for purchase on Amazon. And also come to the BRI website if you want to sign up for our newsletter or to get access to a lot of the research that we've released into the Creative Commons. Anything else from you, Alex?
Well, actually, before we go, I wanted to ask you about your new book, Big Ideas. Chancellor Don Tapscott speaks to a new generation. So maybe helpful for our international audience. I think the Canadian audience probably knows this, but the international audience, about your experience at Trent University. Tell us about that and about the book.
Well, Trent University is a relatively small liberal arts and sciences university on the beautiful Autonomy River in Ontario, Canada. And I just completed a 6-year term, 2 terms actually, as the chancellor of Trent. And during that period, I found myself pontificating to the students in various ways about their generation and the challenges facing them and the kind of world that they were going into. And I pontificated so much that it's a whole book. And the university decided to publish this as a book. So it's got my speeches and writings during that period, and it ends up being quite a significant book, along with a lot of fun photos as well. So it's not going to be a global bestseller, but it actually contains a whole bunch of insights about how the world is evolving, and really challenges students to go out and live a principled life of consequence. And I argue that, that sure, by all means, go out and be successful, but we need a lot more from you. And blockchain makes its way into that in a number of ways, as I did, of course, talk about the technology, because during that period, blockchain revolution came out. We launched the BRI, and you and I did our whole thing. So the book is now up on Amazon. The title again is Big Ideas. What's the subtitle? Do you have that there?
Yes, Chancellor Don Tapscott speaks to a new generation.
Yeah, so by all means, go and make a volume purchase. Everyone in your company should have a copy. All people under 35 should have a copy. Anyway.
Well, that sounds great. Well, as someone who has a liberal arts education, I know the value of schools like Trent. Especially as the world is changing, you need to not necessarily learn specific, skills, but have a broad knowledge base and a way of thinking about the world to succeed.
Yeah, and as I argue, undergraduate, what you learn is actually not the most important thing. It's the underlying capabilities that you build in undergraduate, your capacity to think critically, to solve problems, to communicate, to see the big picture, to your passion for lifelong learning, your ability to do research. I mean, these are all of the kinds of underlying capabilities that will really matter, because you're going to change your knowledge base multiple times as you go throughout life. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I don't want to give away the whole book here, but by all means, go pick up an advance copy on Amazon. That will be out at the beginning of October. It's at the printers now.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's it for us this week, right?
Okay. What's on tap? We'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.